This spring, the Hardy Plant Society did a survey of their 6,000 odd members as to which were their favourite plants, which plants they wished they had never planted, and which plants they'd tried to grow but they couldn't. And in this video we're going to go through the plants that those people think they wish they had never planted. And apart from the 6,000 members, I also asked a load of celebrity or well-known great gardeners the plants that they wish they had never planted, because everybody seems to make that mistake, because what is a dreadful plant for my garden and goes wild in someone else's might be quite difficult. I always remembered in Japan I put the willow herb, the white willow herb, Epilobium, on a planting plan, and they said, no way, that plant is banned. You are not allowed to plant that because it goes completely mad. Now I'm standing here in front of my Comfrey. This is Symphytum hidcut, and it comes in a blue and a pink form, and I think this is the blue form. And for some people you mention the word Comfrey and they think, thug, weed goes mad. But if you can control it, I think it's wonderful. And I've got it on this side of the rose meadow, and basically it is pretty much a no maintenance plant. And what's more, the bees love it. So it starts flowering off in about February, and it will probably go on till about June. Now we're sort of mid-March, and you see it's flowering very nicely, and I can hear, I don't know if you can, but I can really hear the bees working it. They just love it. There are one or two daffodils coming through it. Sometimes I get the odd patch of bindweed that was here before, but I pull it out. But basically it really is the no maintenance plant that is pretty much evergreen here in the East Midlands. And I think it's quite attractive. Now, if I had lots of treasures growing amongst it, obviously it would just totally overrun them. But here it doesn't matter, because that's all it is. It's just Comfrey and a few specimens like the topiary and the yews that I'm taking there, and the apple trees. So they're brilliant for pollinating, and it works well. And if it were against a lawn, then I mow it. Now, it does occasionally jump and seed in my rose bed over there with the other things, and I'll just pull it out. So you need to exercise a bit of control on it. But I think if you've got steep banks, you've got lots of areas that you want to cover, this is a great plant. And to plant it, you just need to dig a bit up and plant loads of little roots, and it will go so fast. And so it is, I think, ideal. I can hear people shouting, saying, no, no, it's a thug, I couldn't control it, but I love it. So for my next one. Now this plant here is Acanthus mollis, and this was on several people's hit list. They hate it. Mary Berry. In her old garden she had lots of it at the back of a border, and she said she wished she had never planted it because it just took over. And it takes a long time to get rid of, because you think you've killed it off and then it sends up another shoot, and it can go on like that for many, many years. But here I've got it in the gravel. It really hasn't spread out much. Well, it doesn't really spread out at all. And it's the end of the winter, but you see the leaves are still very evergreen. So I think it's quite a nice plant in a situation where you can control it. As not to say I'm pulling it out as it spreads across the gravel, because it doesn't. It seems to confine itself here. But if I put it in a border with lots of other things, then obviously it would run amok. And there's a Spinosus as well, which has a much more prickly leaf, which isn't so evergreen in my book. And to my right, we've got another thug, and this is Vinca Major. Now, I keep meaning to get rid of this. It just spreads and spreads and spreads. And I'm not the only person that finds this. Deb's Goodenough, who was the head gardener at Highgrove for many years, she planted it. She brought a white one in and planted it on a bank below a hedge, and she nurtured it and tended it, and it got going and it looked fabulous. And then it wanted to take over the whole garden. And that's what Vinca Major does. And that was the same with Derry Watkins, who's a very good plantsman from Special Plant Nursery. And she has a wonderful range of plants for sale. But she got a rare white Vinca from seed, planted in her garden, and again, wished she never had. Because you think you've pulled it out, and it is quite easy to pull out with all its little roots, but there'll be so many other little roots in beside it that it just keeps going. So I do quite like the Vinca minor with a small leaf, But this thug, I wish I'd never brought it into the garden. And for my next little rampant number. Now you can see I've got my feet in wild garlic. And this is a plant that Jim Carter, a very keen gardener, who's also an actor, well, mainly an actor, but also a keen gardener, and he had this in his garden, he inherited it, and he tried to edit it out, but then he decided it was better to live with it. Now we are in March, and you can see it's thrusting up through the ground. It's only been up a week or so, and then when the leaves die down, it then flowers with lovely little white flowers, and then it all dies down. And by about June, you would never know you had it here. But actually, I think it's a fantastic plant, and I've got it in certain patches. I've got this big patch here. But because we use so much of it now, we put it in pestos, we make it in salads. It's just wonderful. It's got a lovely, fresh, garlicky taste, and it doesn't make your breath really pong like normal garlic. But I'm sure it must be full of antioxidants and lovely things like that. And it's so lovely to have a splurge of it as much as you like and for a couple of months, and then it goes. Now, if I did want to control it, what I would have to do I'd have to spray it off, because, and even then, if I sprayed it off with glyphosate, there would be a seed burden from all the things in the soil, so it would keep coming up for a few years. So if you want to get rid of a plant like this, or the Comfrey, or the Acanthus mollis, I think really glyphosate is the only effective way to do it. And even then, you've really got to keep on top of it, because the seed burden and the roots that are right down will still keep coming up for a couple of years or so, I would say. But anyway, so that's one. Some plants take over and we learn to edit them, live with them, and possibly even love them. Ivy is another plant that seems to be spreading with our wetter winters and our climate change, and it really is seeding in my borders and everywhere. Now, people have a love-hate relationship with ivy, but apparently as long as you stop it getting into the eaves and you cut it back maybe every other year so it doesn't spread out so far, it doesn't lift the tiles and things like that if you control it. And also insulates the wall against freeze-thaw action. Now, some people are allergic to ivy. My daughter is very allergic to it. I think that's quite unusual, but I actually quite like it. I don't like it going everywhere mad, so I can control it quite a bit. I definitely edit it, but it does have flowers in winter, which are brilliant for insects and things. And I think it is useful in certain places. We often use the ivy ready-made grown screens for fencing for people who want to have instant privacy, and it's a very good instant private screen, really. And as long as you clip it once or twice a year so it stays flat, it looks very neat. It really can be a great plant. Fergus Garrett, who's been head gardener at Great Dixter for many years and is a great plantsman, even Fergus makes mistakes. He planted Helianthus angustifolius in his stock beds, and this is known as a swamp sunflower, and it grows to about 2 meters high, and it's got lovely tall flowers, but it's just run amok and taken over. Now, in my soil, which is dry, I bet if I planted it, it would be much more better behaved. But it's the situation, and sometimes they just love where you put them and they run for it. So Claire Austin, who runs Claire Austin Hardy Plants and loves lots of perennials, has many of them, says the one that she wished she never planted in her moist garden was Sanguisorba stipulata richeriensis, and that's got lovely tall willowy white and red type flowers. But the problem is it spreads so much that when you try to remove it, the rhizomes are so deep and so big it's near impossible. Shane Collinley, who's the Royal Flower Arranger and has a fabulous garden, he surprised me with his. He said it was this Alchemilla mollis. Now here it's just coming out now. But he says in his garden it just seeds everywhere and just totally runs amok. And he reckoned the best way that he's seen it controlled, although he's given up growing it, is you just trim it off when it's just about over with the flowering, and then that knocks off obviously all the potential seed heads. But I've got it here in my veg garden, and it sows itself around a bit, but it's not a thug, it's not in the way, and I actually quite enjoy it here. Adam Clayton, who is the bass guitarist for U2 and it's also a very keen gardener with a lovely garden just outside Dublin, he inherited a lot of the common laurel or cherry laurel, Prunus laurocerasus, and a lot of people have a problem with this big thuggish laurel. You plant it as a hedge or on the edge of a woodland because it's fast and it can tolerate the driest of dry conditions, but then it becomes a massive thug, gets huge and just shades out everything else in its wake, and he has spent years cutting it down and removing it. Now I find the easiest way to get rid of common laurel is just to chainsaw it off at the ground, and then if you didn't do anything about it, it would reshoot massively and it would soon be up to the size that it was, and then you put the EcoPlug Max into the trunk and that slowly kills it off and it will not shoot again. But it is a troublesome thug and people so often use it because it's so easy to grow, but it gets out of control so quickly. And if it's a hedge, to keep it anything like neat, you've got to cut it a couple of times a year at least. I much prefer the Portuguese laurel, which is a bit more controlled and has a smaller, darker, more refined looking leaf. And that will also tolerate very dry situations in heavy shade, as of course will common yew, Taxus baccata, which is my all-time favourite. I think probably the plant that we asked most about how to control, get rid of, is bamboo. And this can be such a thug. And of course there are hundreds of different types of bamboo, and there are the clump formers and the runners. But recently Dave, who helps me in the garden one day a week, he looks after other gardeners, he was bringing me back trailer loads of bamboo foliage which he cut off, and then I gave it to the cows and they loved it. And then when it regrew, he then sprayed it with glyphosate. And it probably will take 2 or 3 applications to kill it. And those who hate using glyphosate obviously won't do that. They'll just have to dig and dig and dig and dig, and the next year do the same. But that I find is the best way to get rid of it, because otherwise it can just take over acres, depending on which bamboo it is, and it's such a problem. But I was pleased that the cows really liked it. They absolutely chased me in the field when I brought it in. They couldn't wait to start devouring it. So to get back to where I started, the Hardy Plant Society, their top list of the 5 most unwanted plants were Acanthus, which we talked about, Lysimachia. Now this surprised me. This is often known as creeping jenny, which is the low level creeping one, or maybe Lysimachia punctata. But they said that many members found it a real problem on any types of soil. So I was surprised about that. Japanese anemone, that was in their list of the top 5. Now that does spread, but I love it. It's late flowering. It's late to come into leaf, but it's late flowering. I think it's quite pretty. But you have to be on top of it or it will take over acres. Hardy geraniums they had in their list, which really surprised me because there were some geraniums that are much worse than others, and many of them are great value givers. They flower for so long. So I was really surprised to see that. But the final one on their top 5 was Euphorbia robbii, an evergreen euphorbia. We all probably know it. And I think in deepest, darkest shade, if you can't get anything else to grow, then Euphorbia robbii is the one for you. But you must somehow contain it so it can't creep out to the rest of your garden, whether it's contained with a path or a lawn that you're mowing, so you're mowing it off or whatever. But anyway, it's nice to know that lots of people plant plants, even really experienced gardeners plant plants that they wish they never had because they just go mad. But there's a heads up on what you might want to think twice about if you're going to rush out to the garden centre tomorrow.